Today it's the watches of Holthinrichs. That's right, we're taking a look at the Dutch independent brand that's known for their unusual manufacturing techniques, but more importantly, their idiosyncratic design. And of course, Collective is an authorized retailer of Holthinrichs watches. You can find their full collection at collectivehorology.com. Speaking of finding things, Asher, you're the one who found Holthinrichs. How on earth? Well, you didn't discover
I'm the one.
Holthinrichs, but among us at Collective, you're the one who discovered Holthinrichs. How on earth did you hear about these guys, and how did they first get your attention?
Sure. I mean, I think like so many people, what got my attention about the brand initially was the process, if not the outcome. And what I mean by that is, when I first heard about the brand, what came to my attention was the fact that the brand was manufacturing watches with 3D printed cases, which is something that I had never seen before. And in my mind, 3D printing was a much more rudimentary art than it, of course, actually is. But it was enough to pique my interest. And as soon as I took a look at those watches, this is about 5 years ago now, I was struck because I'd never seen case architecture that looked quite like what they were able to accomplish with those early pieces. And like so many independents, it's been floating around in my head, but there's just not a lot of them out there. And I hadn't had the chance to really go hands-on with them until we met with the brand and with the founder, Michael, just a few months ago at Geneva Watch Days.
Yeah, let's talk about Michiel Holthinrichs, the founder of the brand, because I think, yes, the 3D printing is really interesting. It's kind of what they're known for, but Michael's story is really interesting, and specifically, like, his background is fascinating. He was trained as an architect, and I think what's cool about the watches is their design, really. I mean, he's taking the inspiration of Art Nouveau and translating it into case architecture and case design. And in a lot of cases, he's using 3D printing to achieve that, but he's using 3D printing in service of a bigger creative idea that really draws on his past.
That's the point, right? I mean, so many watches exist because the watchmaker has a desire to make something, but they don't necessarily have a core ideology behind it other than like the finest finishing or a desire to like reach a certain level of let's say accuracy or something to that effect. What we don't often see is somebody who has a very clear creative vision, and the watch is created in service of that vision as opposed to the other way around. I mean, there's a handful of folks that come to mind when I think of that. I mean, MB&F and Max Booster is probably the most obvious example of this in the modern time.
I think Debatoon is similar.
Absolutely.
I mean, which also translates into a very clear aesthetic and kind of case architecture and geometry and all that stuff.
But the soul, I mean, in the case of like Debatoon, for example, not to get too off topic, but the soul of Denny Flageolet really comes through in those watches. His commitment and love of sci-fi and things like that are very, very evident in the aesthetic of the watch, the technical and the finishing notwithstanding. And I think when we look at Holthinrichs,
and this is your watch,
this
is Asher's personal watch on the table here.
Exactly. And the reason why I put my money, down on this watch, aside from our partnership and the rest of it, is because it evoked a feeling in me when I first put my hands on it that made me need to have it, because the passion of the watchmaker, the clarity of vision around bringing specific architectural elements into play, and the elegance of the overall piece come together to make something really magical. And this is just where the line starts.
Well, let's talk about the watch, but before that, I do want to go back to Geneva Watch Days.
Sure.
Because you knew about Holthinrichs before. Of course, I had heard the name. I didn't really know much. But Geneva Watch Days is where we met Michael for the first time. Funny that we met them in Geneva because Holthinrichs is, of course, a Dutch brand. They're not actually based in Switzerland, so they were there. That will figure into the story because Michael was wandering around Geneva with a briefcase full of watches as the something of like a watch vagabond in
which, by the way, as a side note, apparently they buy a new suitcase every year. And that's like part. It's like they have if I remember this story correct, they have a specific vintage store they like to go to in Geneva where they find a new briefcase, and every year they kind of mix it up, which is kind of fabulous.
So we meet this guy. Initially, we met him, I think, at the tent or the pavilion where Geneva Watch Days is headquartered. And to his great credit, he's like, "Look, I'm not officially exhibiting at this fair. I'm not going to show you watches here."
Yeah.
So he takes us and his briefcase full of watches, and we go around the corner to the Grand Duke Pub, a place we love and we've talked a lot about. And this is not only where we met, but this is really where we fell in love with Holthinrichs.
Yeah.
So what did we see, and why do we love these guys so much?
Well, I mean, it was two things. One, we were sitting there. It was you, me, and Jeff, our sales director. We were sitting in a booth, and two folks from Holthinrichs. It was Damien and Michael. They open up the suitcase, and the first thing that comes out is their in-house piece. And
this is the Ornament Nouveau.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, as is true with so many things in this industry, like we're very lucky. We get to go hands-on with hundreds of watches a year. You know, it's incredible to have that opportunity. But what that means is, you know, it takes a lot to get me really excited, because I see a lot of beautiful watches.
Yeah, this was what, day 3 of Geneva Watch Days. We had literally seen hundreds of watches that week. Yep.
And this one stopped me dead in my tracks. Because aside from the case architecture, aside from the clarity of vision around the design of the case and how it connected to the architectural history, which we had just learned about as Michael had taken us through the history of the brand, the movement was unlike, from an architectural standpoint, was unlike anything I'd ever really seen before, because he was also translating all of the architectural elements that went into the case into many of the bridges and structural and functional elements of that movement.
It's a complete Art Nouveau watch, not just the case design. I mean, here you have a very clear Art Nouveau case. It's very sculptural. There, everything is sculptural, down to the bridges of the movement and how time is displayed. It's
in fact, he even has a sculpture in his office made at many scale, a much larger scale, of one of the bridges.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Did not know that.
In that watch. So.
Is that what he showed us the picture of?
Yeah.
Okay, I thought that was like some random bit of like museum art that had sort of inspired.
No, and that's exactly why it was so cool.
That's really cool.
So you have that, and then we started moving our way through the line down in price, ultimately landing on these guys, which are the Signature Ornaments, where the case is not 3D printed; it's CNC'd. There is a model above this, the Lab series, where there are 3D printed cases but still running on the same modified Solita movements that these are.
So similar looking case, but I believe those are titanium 3D printed.
Correct.
Yeah.
So the lugs they're able to do a little bit more of the lugs than they can do with CNC, because I'll tell you, this watch is already pushing the limits of what I've seen from traditional modern CNCing. What they're doing on the Lab series is a step above, and I don't believe is rationally doable on a reductive CNC process. But again, this comes back to that core point of everything that they do is in service of that idea, which is why when you have an entry-level piece like this one, it's not less than, because it still is designed to evoke a certain feeling, it still is designed to evoke a certain aesthetic, and it's doing it within the technical constraints of that watch, versus just making like the Baby Benz version, right?
Yeah, no, this remains one of those watches that it's interesting. If you look at it across a room, it just looks almost kind of like a vintage watch. So what I like about that is, like, although you have a very unusual case shape here, it's not super try hard. Like, it still works as a watch. It's not screaming, look at me. But then when you go up close with it, you're like, oh my gosh, look at this case. Like, this is quite unusual. It's very sculptural. It's extremely beautiful. And speaking of CNC, you look at it and you're like, how on earth are they even doing this?
Yeah.
And it's one of these watches that if you're wearing it, a watch person, I suspect even non-watch people will just be like, that's cool. What is that? And so in that sense, it's not a Baby Benz. Yeah, it's not watered down at all. It's still very much a pure expression of the brand. And it's, aside from its looks, it's extremely wearable. We're talking about a watch that I believe is 38.5 millimeters in diameter. So this is something that wears on the wrist really comfortably. The lug to lug is only 46 millimeters.
And yet, look at how dramatic those lugs are.
Yeah. That's true. I would have, when I'm reading the specs here, I would have guessed that it was longer, but then when you've got it on your wrist, it ends up being extremely modest and wearable. It wears almost kind of like...
Whereas it's the most dramatic lug you've probably ever seen on a watch.
Yeah.
Because the lug isn't really a lug. It's essentially the case.
It's the case. And I was going to say, it kind of, when you're wearing it on your wrist and looking at it top down,
Yep.
it almost looks at like a milled out tonneau shape. To some extent, like
see
that's
that.
kind of how it wears. But then, of course, when you start to look at it in 3 dimensions and in profile, it looks nothing like a tonneau shape. It's absolutely wild. So a really cool watch that doesn't hold back at all.
And a complete thought. I mean, obviously, if you've ever listened to us on Open Work, this is a canard of mine, but it's one that I think is true. Always look at the buckle to determine how complete a thought this watch is. And the buckle on this watch follows through on the overall design language. In fact, so much so that, Gabe, if you take a look, you can even see that Michael integrated the end tip of the spring bar that holds it into the overall design. You see that?
Yeah.
So that the little end of the spring bar is actually a design element.
Yeah.
So it's a feature, not a bug.
And you'll know, of course, that it's securely in there.
Sure. Yeah. I guess you have that added benefit. But
I've spent too much time searching for spring bars on the floor of this office here, so I appreciate knowing that something is set where it's supposed to be.
Absolutely. So on the whole, when you look at that, and we haven't even mentioned the price of this watch yet. This is a 5,300 USD watch. So what you're getting there, what you're really paying for, is a decade of intellectual and artistic expression being brought to life in this piece. The other thing that's interesting about this watch and this model in general is the dial construction.
Yep.
So it's a 3-piece dial construction. So this watch right over here is the pale gold variant. So you have a pale gold dial. Beneath that dial, you have the indices which come up, and so essentially you have the dial and the indices come up below, and then on top of it is a sapphire dial. See that?
Interesting.
So when you look through the sapphire crystal, what you're seeing, and that's why you see the Holthinrichs logo at 12 o'clock reflecting.
And I see like a shadow there.
Exactly.
Yeah. Interesting.
So there's dynamism in that dial based on its architecture and construction that only is additive to the overall aesthetic. So what are you getting here? You're getting what we talked about, the intentionality of this watch. You're getting a case that not only has a reason for being, but is like nothing we've ever seen before, yet still really wearable, even if the lugs are more dramatic than anything we've ever had in the shop, probably. You have a 3-piece dial construction, which is way more complex than most of what we see at this particular price point. And it's made out of titanium, so it's barely noticeable on your wrist, but not so lightweight that it doesn't feel like it has any presence.
Yeah.
It's a remarkably cool watch.
It's cool, and like I said, it's difficult to do all of those things that are just so different in their approach, whether it's that 3-piece dial, the case construction, down to the pin buckle, all that stuff, and not have it feel try-hard. It really comes together in harmony, which is hard to do. So it's both an exercise in wild creativity and kind of restraint or considered design, which is pretty cool. So there you have it. Holthinrichs, pretty cool. And we should just say they're wonderful people. And I think part of what attracted us to the brand is not just the watches, which of course speak for themselves, but it's the people there and Michael's story in particular. I mean, this is a guy who slept on the floor of his workshop to bring his brand to life, and it's truly something he does from the heart. So really cool watches and wonderful people at Holthinrichs. And of course, if you're interested in Holthinrichs, you can find the full collection at collectivehorology.com. And while you're at it, make sure you subscribe to this channel to stay up to date on all things independent watches. Thanks for watching.